He was alive at breakfast. By midnight, he was gone. Not from illness, not from old age. A missile found him, deliberately, precisely, and with a message attached to it that every government on earth understood by morning. Ali Larijani, Iran's most powerful strategic mind, former nuclear negotiator, parliament speaker for 12 years. The one man inside Tehran's inner circle who could pick up a phone, call Washington, and actually be taken seriously on the other end. Gone. Killed in a targeted Israeli strike on March 17, 2026, confirmed by Iran's own government within hours. And here is the number that should stop you cold. This is now the second time in 19 days that Israel has killed the man running Iran. The supreme leader went on day one. Now this. You might be thinking, okay, another Middle East headline. What does this have to do with me? Here is what. 20% of the world's oil moves through one narrow stretch of water that Iran can shut down with a single order. Your gas price, your grocery bill, your heating cost, all of it runs through that choke point. And the one man inside Iran who might have quietly picked up a phone and said, let's find a way to stop this before it goes too far, just got buried. What happens next is not a foreign policy story. It is a cost of living story. And it starts right now. This is crisis capital. To truly feel the weight of this moment, you need to understand who Ali Larijani actually was, because he was not just a politician with a fancy title. He was something far more rare, far more irreplaceable, and far more dangerous to lose in the middle of a war. Larijani came from a political dynasty that many referred to as Iran's equivalent of the Kennedys. Think about that for a second. In a country where power is everything, his family name alone carried enormous weight. But unlike many powerful figures who inherit status and coast on it, Larijani actually earned his position through decades of hard strategic work. He served as the Speaker of Iran's parliament for over a decade, from 2008 to 2020. And before that, he was Iran's chief nuclear negotiator from 2005 to 2007, the man sitting across the table from Western diplomats when the fate of Iran's nuclear program was being debated. He once described European incentives to abandon nuclear fuel production as exchanging a pearl for a candy bar. That one sentence tells you everything about how sharp and confident this man was when it came to geopolitical chess. He was one of the regime's most experienced insiders, deeply trusted by the late Supreme Leader Khamenei, and he was among a very small group of people who could manage both the war and the politics around it. Think about that combination. Managing a war and managing the politics around it at the same time. That is an extraordinarily rare skill set. Most people can do one or the other. Very few can do both. Larijani was one of those few. Now let us zoom out slightly, because Larijani's death does not happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a war that has already rewritten the history of the Middle East in less than 3 weeks. The killing of Larijani, 67 years old, a confidant of the slain Ali Khamenei and his son and successor Mojtaba Khamenei, marks the removal of the most senior figure in Tehran's leadership since the opening airstrikes of the war 19 days ago. And those opening airstrikes included something that would have seemed absolutely unthinkable just a year ago. Larijani was widely seen as the de facto leader of Iran following Israel's assassination of the supreme leader Ali Khamenei on the very first day of the conflict. Let that land for a moment. Iran's supreme leader, the highest religious and political authority in the entire country, was assassinated on day one. And now, just 19 days later, the man who stepped up to fill that void has also been killed. Most of Iran's top leadership was already decimated in June 2025. The majority of its current top leaders are relatively new to their posts. So what you are looking at right now is a regime that has had its entire leadership structure systematically dismantled, layer by layer, over the course of less than a year. This is not a war where armies are clashing on a battlefield. This is a war where the brain of the enemy is being surgically removed, one piece at a time. Now here's where it gets even more dangerous. Operationally, the impact of Larijani's death may appear limited in the short term. But politically, it could harden attitudes and reinforce the narrative inside Tehran that this is an existential fight aimed at dismantling the leadership itself. Over time, it removes one of the very few insiders who could have helped shape a political off-ramp. And when analysts use the phrase political off-ramp, they mean something very specific and very important. An off-ramp is an exit from conflict, a pathway to negotiation, to ceasefire, to peace. Every war, no matter how brutal, eventually ends. And the people who make it end are not always generals. Sometimes they are diplomats. Sometimes they are the quiet insiders who know how to open a back channel, make a phone call, and find a way out that lets both sides walk away without total humiliation. Larijani was that person. He could operate inside the security state and still engage in external negotiation. He helped shape Iran's nuclear posture and was involved in quiet efforts to reopen channels with Washington, even as tensions escalated. Just as importantly, he helped manage the political layer of the war itself. This is what makes his death so much more consequential than just a military victory for Israel. You can replace a general, you can promote another soldier, but you cannot simply manufacture a man who has spent 40 years building relationships, understanding the system from the inside, and knowing how to speak to both hardliners and diplomats in the same breath. That kind of person takes decades to develop, and now he is gone. Iranian-American political analyst Trita Parsi summed it up bluntly. Larijani could have played a direct role in future ceasefire negotiations. Parsi also made a sharp and uncomfortable observation about Israel's strategic interest, that it may actually be in Israel's interest to prolong this war as long as possible and to eliminate any potential off-ramps that even Trump might be looking for. That is a remarkable thing to say, because it suggests that even within the US-Israeli alliance, there may be very different agendas at play. Trump may want an exit. Israel may want to keep going. And with Larijani gone, the exit becomes significantly harder to find. Now let us talk about what happens inside Iran after this, because here is where things get truly dangerous. For many years, Larijani was seen as the bookish, calculating frontman for the regime, a counterpoint to his more fiery, impulsive colleagues. He was the moderate voice in a room full of hardliners. He was the one who understood that sometimes you need to talk before you shoot. With him gone, who fills that role? The answer, right now, appears to be nobody. One figure who could be running much of the regime behind the scenes is Ahmad Vahidi, the IRGC deputy chief on the eve of the war, a man who was not even among the IRGC's top 10 until December, when he was suddenly elevated to deputy chief. Think about that. This is the person potentially steering one of the most dangerous countries on the planet right now. A man who was an afterthought in his own organization just a few months ago. That is the leadership vacuum Larijani's death has created. His death also means that Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader and son of the late Ayatollah, loses one of the few men who truly understood how his father ran power. Larijani was part of an inner circle that understood every unwritten rule, every hidden process, every informal power structure inside the Islamic Republic. Think of it like a new CEO who has never actually run a company, suddenly losing the once seasoned advisor who knew where every body was buried. The new CEO is still in charge, but now he is flying completely blind. Iran's foreign minister tried to put on a strong face after the news broke. Abbas Araghchi said the United States and Israel had yet to realize that Iran's government does not rely on a single individual, and that Iran has a strong political structure with established institutions. He even pointed to Khamenei's own death as proof that the system continued even after losing its most important figure. And to be fair, he has a point. Iran has survived enormous shocks before. But there is a fundamental difference between surviving and thriving. There is a difference between a system that continues to function and one that is slowly losing the ability to think strategically. A body can still move after serious brain damage. It does not mean it is okay. The pressing question now is what practical effect Larijani's assassination will have on the Islamic Republic's ability to continue mounting a coherent military and diplomatic response, and potentially on its very survival as a governing system. That question does not have a simple answer, but here at Crisis Capital we want to give you the framework to think about it clearly. When you lose your generals, you lose battlefield coordination. When you lose your diplomats, you lose the ability to end the war on your own terms. When you lose both, which is essentially what Iran has experienced over the last several months, you are left with a regime that can still fight, still fire missiles, still resist, but cannot steer. It becomes a car with the gas pedal stuck and no steering wheel. In his final public messages before his death, Larijani was blunt. He framed the war as an existential struggle and challenged Muslim countries directly, asking them, "Which side are you on?" over their apparent silence as the violence raged on. The day before he was killed, he specifically rebuked Islamic countries, and the UAE in particular, for what he called abandoning Iran and siding with the United States and Israel. Those were some of the last public words he ever spoke. A man who could sense time was running out, calling out the silence of his supposed allies, broadcasting into a void. There is something almost cinematic about that, and deeply tragic. Now let us briefly address the economic dimension, because this war is absolutely not staying inside the borders of Iran and Israel. U.S. allies have already refused Trump's call to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. Every escalation in this conflict puts that corridor under greater threat. Markets are watching closely. Oil traders are watching closely. And every time a senior Iranian figure is killed and Iran pledges revenge, the risk premium on energy goes up. The impact lands at gas stations, in shipping costs, in the price of goods on shelves. This is not abstract geopolitics anymore. This touches everyday life in every country on Earth. So where does this all lead? That is the question this channel exists to answer, not with false certainty, but with honest, clear analysis. What we know right now is this: Iran has lost its supreme leader, its security chief, most of its senior military commanders, and its most capable diplomatic mind, all within less than a year. The regime is still functioning, still fighting, still firing. But it is doing so with a leadership bench that would have been considered junior level just 12 months ago. The people at the table now are not the people who built the strategy. They are the people who inherited a war they did not start and a crisis they were not trained for. The killing of Larijani sends a message to every surviving Iranian leader that is chillingly simple. Compromise or die. That is a brutal message. And it is one that will define Iran's next move more than any military calculation. Will the remaining leadership read that message and look for an exit? Or will they read it as proof that no compromise is safe and double down on total resistance? History tells us that when a government feels cornered, when it feels that its very existence is under threat, it rarely chooses the rational exit. It chooses to fight, even when the odds are impossible. And that is precisely what makes the next 72 hours so critical to watch. This story is not over. It is barely beginning. In our next video right here on Crisis Capital, we are going to break down Iran's remaining response options in detail. What they can actually do militarily, what their proxies across the region are likely to activate, and how the oil market is likely to move based on each scenario. None of that analysis exists anywhere else in this format. So if you are not subscribed yet, right now is the moment. Hit that button because the next video drops very soon and you do not want to be the last one to understand what is coming. And before you leave, drop one comment below, just one. Tell me, do you think what remains of Iran's leadership will look for a way out of this war, or will they escalate further? I read every single comment personally, and your answer shapes what we cover next. If this video gave you clarity that you could not find anywhere else today, and I know it did because you made it this far, share it with one person right now. One shares how information becomes power. On Crisis Capital, that is exactly what we're here to give you. Stay informed, stay sharp, and stay ready, because the next crisis is never as far away as you think.